Hello everyone and welcome to episode 2 of Retry Evolve. Today we're going to look back at some of the console releases of one of the most popular arcade games of all time. Our subject of course today is the arcade game Galaga, made by Namco in 1981. Galaga was Namco's sequel to their 1979 arcade hit Galaxian. Galaga had gameplay improvements over Galaxian, first being the ability to have more than one shot on screen at a given time. They made numerous improvements that were immediately noticeable in the game's sound and sprites. What most people remember about the game Galaga was that your ship could get captured. Yeah, they could come down and steal you right off the bottom of the screen. But getting your ship back is where the real fun begins. You get to have the double ship. And I'll tell you, the challenging stages, the game's bonus stages, are impossible to get a perfect score on if you don't have two ships bolted together. The first console release of Galaga that I wanted to show you is the one released in 1987 for the Atari 7800, and it was released by Atari. The audio that you're hearing is from the 7800 version as well. As much as I love my Atari 7800 console, I gotta admit, this is a huge disappointment. You can clearly hear that the audio is nowhere near as good as the arcade version of the game. This console version of the game came out 6 years after the original arcade release. The Galaga boss that captures your ship is almost unrecognizable, and gone are the badges that represent the level that you're currently on. It's just unceremoniously replaced with a number. For the Atari 7800 version of Galaga, graphics and sound can easily be forgiven. I'll tell you, my real problem with this version of the game is the fact that it's sluggish. Hell, it's even slow in comparison to all the other console releases of the game. Considering how slow the enemies move, this game should be super easy, but it isn't, because you move just as slow. Next up, we're going to look at the 1988 Bandai release of Galaga on the original Nintendo. The sound playing now is from the Nintendo version, and I gotta admit, it's a huge step up from the Atari 7800 version. I definitely still have some criticisms for the graphics. Some of the enemies flicker, they don't look as bright and vibrant as the arcade version does, but I'll tell you, at least the enemies are recognizable. The game's speed is definitely better as well. It's still not as good as the arcade version, but I'll tell you, it's a lot closer. It's a trade-off. The 7800 version doesn't have flicker, but its enemy ships don't look as close to the arcade version of the game. Another small detail I want to point out is that the stars in the Nintendo version of Galaga blink in and out the same way that the arcade version does, whereas in the Atari version, the stars just stay lit up all the time. Now check out where the blue arrow is. I know it's kind of hard to see because all the background of this video is black, but where the arrow is pointing is a column that exists on the right-hand side of the Nintendo version of this game. That column is significant. Because of it, the Nintendo version of Galaga is closest to the aspect ratio of the arcade version of Galaga, which means you have more time to see the shots and the ships coming at you. Out of all the versions I show here, the Nintendo version of Galaga is definitely the closest to the arcade game. That said, it's also the most frustrating and the most difficult. After level 4, the ships will swoop in and break off formation and try to suicide bomb directly into your ship. In the arcade version of Galaga, you can react quickly and dodge left or right when they try this attack. But in the Nintendo version of the game, they break off from their formation rather abruptly, and I'll tell you, you pretty much have to dodge the attack before they even break off, or they're going to hit you. It's a minor criticism, but overall, this game is well worth picking up. The Nintendo port of Galaga was released on the Nintendo Wii's Virtual Console back in 2007. The arcade port is readily available, being part of the Namco Museum game. That was released on PlayStation, Nintendo 64 DS, PS2, Xbox, GameCube, and even all 3 of the modern systems. In 2001, Namco released a new arcade unit for Galaga that also included Miss Pac-Man. What's really cool about this was that they kept the glitch where you could stop enemy attacks and also added a continue feature, so if you wanted to jump right back in at the same level that you died on, you could. Alright, I am not showing you this footage to bash on the Game Boy version of Galaga. It came out 14 years after the arcade version, and the truth of the matter is, it looks and sounds pretty good considering the limitations of the Game Boy. This was released in 1995 as part of a 2-pack with Galaxian. But you know what? It actually should look pretty good, because it was released by Namco, the makers of the original arcade game. As an interesting side note, the arcade version of Galaga has the same split-screen bug that Pac-Man has. If you get to level 255 and roll it over, it will go to level 0 and the graphics will get all glitchy. Depending on how the arcade unit was set up, it could actually cause the system to crash, making it unplayable until it was power cycled by the owner. Even though I only cover 4 systems in 14 years in this episode of Evolved, don't think for a second the Galaga story's finished. It's still one of the most popular retro titles of all time, 29 years after its release. For VideoGameSaga.com, this has been Tony B, asking you, have you evolved?